How are you doing, sir?
Oh, I'm doing okay. Just sitting here in Atlanta, getting ready to move out after finishing Guardians Volume 3, at least the filming part of it.
Yeah. It must be fun to be like, I'm obviously going to work and I'm getting paid, but also, I get to go somewhere that I've been and like it's not a vacation, but also it's probably a comfort level there to be like, I'm familiar. I know where to go eat. I know where to go, like, take a walk. There's something there,
Well,
right?
yeah, I mean, my home right now is in Georgia. So I moved here because I've been filming so much here. I shot Guardians 2 here, I shot Guardians 3 here, I shot the Suicide Squad here. So I have a house that's, nice location and nice amount of, trees and stuff like that. So I really love it. I grew up in Missouri, so Georgia is very close to what I know.
Fair enough. The house that Spandex built. There you go. I've long loved your stuff, even going back to like Slither and like I've seen all of the PG porn. So like
Yeah,
I've
great.
been around.
Yeah. Well, you haven't lived till you see PG porn.
Oh, it was my favorite thing to show people for a while until I realized, sometimes you're being creepy. Uh, Got to know who you're showing it to.
Yeah.
But I was so in love with the Suicide Squad last year and made my top 10. And I'm not a huge TV watcher. I see too many movies. I gotta like not look at a screen once in a while, or I'll
Yeah.
not have a relationship or eyeballs. But I knew I wanted to watch this one just because you created this character that you're enraged by and amused by and you give a shit about, despite necessarily no reason to, except the skill of the writing and the performance. And like when you were thinking about making the show, why was it Peacemaker as opposed to any of the other like bizarre characters that you made us fall in love with and then brutally murder?
I think it's a couple reasons. I think number one, I love all the characters from Suicide Squad, but we learned a lot about Ratcatcher 2's backstory, a lot about Bloodsport's backstory, a lot about where Polka Dot Man came from. We didn't learn much about Peacemaker, his background, where he came from. And John Cena and I had a lot of conversations about who this guy really was, how awkward he was, how in this in this group of outcasts and losers, the guy who's the biggest braggart and the guy who seems like he's the frat boy popular guy is actually the guy who's the most insecure and the guy who feels the most out of place in any setting. And so I thought that was, great fodder for a story about a human being. Also, he had the most to grow. He was a jerk, and the rest of them had some sort of change in them. And I think that he had a lot of stuff to do. And frankly, also, I just liked working with John Cena. He's a great guy. He's got a lot of integrity. And I saw an ability in him that I didn't think was fully brought out in him as an actor, and that no medium, whether TV or film, had completely taken advantage of his talent. And I thought that building a show around this character would help the world to glimpse how talented a guy he really was as an actor.
Totally. And I think something that's underrated is I think anyone who's acting now who has a wrestling background, like if they have the ability to be an actor, there's a lot you can tap into because there's so many skills that you need there. You need to be able to make fun of yourself, even though you need to project this strength that I feel like, if you can hit your lines and act, you can probably be a pretty good comedian while looking like an action hero. Like it just seems like it's, how could you not want to play with that type of like clay to mold? It's almost anything's on the table.
Yeah, although I do have to say, I think that wrestlers who can actually act are pretty rare.
Yeah.
And even a lot of the actors that are making livings acting, I'm not sure that they're really that good. I don't believe them. I don't see it in their eyes. But the thing that sets aside, apart people like John and Dave Bautista, who I've worked with a lot, is there's just a reality to where they are, and you see it in the eyes.
Yeah.
And that groundedness is a rare thing. And John, in addition, also has the ability to really flow with the comedic elements of something. He's really a funny guy once he gets going, and probably the best improv actor I've ever seen in my life.
Well, I mean, you write material that I feel like you have to have that sense of humor almost to get, because it's very specific, but also somehow has become universal, which for a weirdo like me is kind of the highest compliment of like, you make a thing that you feel like 12 people should like, but 12 billion people like. It's
It's
cracking the
weird.
code.
It is strange. Yeah, it is. Because so many things, when you're making jokes about Batmite,
Yeah.
and then suddenly that's the biggest show ever on HBO Max, you're like, what the heck is going on? But it's cool. It's really cool that I can do the stuff I really love and have people watch it.
Does it embolden you because you're just like, I keep getting away with this? Like, why would I not get more specific as opposed to less?
Well, it does embolden me, but I think what emboldens me the most is just I've noticed that when I'm just being authentic and I'm telling the story that I really want to tell, that it works well with the audience. The audience gets it. I don't have to dumb things down. I don't have to make things less complicated. I mean, there's, Peacemaker on its face is very simple. It's crass and crude, but really when you take it apart, it's not simple. It's a drama shrouded by a comedy, shrouded by a horror movie, shrouded by, a science fiction tale.
Oh.
So it's all of these different things put together in a really true mix of genres, but that still all goes back to these characters and the relationships between them. And that's the most important thing. That's what we really hang our hats on. And I think but people have no problem understanding that, they don't have any problem with the fact that we have a dance scene at the beginning,
If anything, it's beloved.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Which if ever there was a thing to be like, I can kind of go wherever I want. Is there no one has questioned why this is here, only delighted that it exists. And that's a great example of just how committed everyone is, because everybody looks like they're putting on the High School Musical in that opening dance.
Yeah.
Everyone is so committed.
They're totally committed, and the seriousness, of course, makes it both funny and weird and odd. And yeah, I think that was my signal to the audience from the beginning, that don't think about what you expect from, superhero TV shows. That isn't what this is. This is its own animal. Be prepared for anything. And we're going to show you that it can be anything starting with a dance.
Yeah. Well, when it can be anything, and especially, you come up with the idea, you're really kind of starting from scratch. You can go anywhere. How do you find a compelling story? A movie, obviously there's some sort of a time limitation, even in a franchise.
Yeah.
This is longer form and can go on. Like you really could have had him do almost anything and it probably would have been okay, if not better. So how do you find something that one interests you, but also feels like it's also going to be the right show, because it could be anything.
Well, I think that I knew that there was something about Peacemaker that was inherently about our time today. I mean, in a number of ways, it was, social and political in the right ways that I felt like I wanted to play with. And I really haven't done that much in my career thus far. No. He's a guy who's a little backwards. He's like a lot of guys I grew up with. He's also been in prison for 4 years. So he's missed the Me Too movement. He's missed a lot of things that have changed in just 4 years. He doesn't understand the internet. He believes everything he reads on Facebook and Twitter and wherever, like a lot of people I know and have to deal with online. And he meets this woman who is Leota Adebayo, who's the opposite of him, and is politically very different from him, in many ways very different from him. Yet at the same time, there's something about the two of them that are very similar, and they have a sense of humor they share in various things. And it's a kindness that she has towards him that he's just thirsty for, dying for. And that relationship to me was the center of the story. And I found doing a television program very freeing, because in a movie, at the end of the day, it is about plot. At least when you're making big spectacle films, you have to push from one scene to the next. The audience gets, frustrated very quickly if you stick around too much, with characters talking, focusing too much on the minutia of relationships. And in a television show, I was really able to spread out and go into the nuances of these different relationships, whether it's Peacemaker with Leota, or Peacemaker with Harcourt, or Peacemaker with Vigilante, or whomever. I think that made this fun for me and exciting and new. And so I was really creatively invigorated by all that.
For sure. I think there's a little bit of that in Super, though. I think you put them in tights and have them talk. There's a little bit of everything in that one, but there's...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, there's definitely a lot of Super's DNA in Peacemaker,
Sure.
But I can't get to the place where all of a sudden I'm talking about, like if you know, if this was a movie, Harcourt and Peacemaker would have either had to get together at the end of the movie, or you'd leave them. I mean, it's like that's not what their relationship is. It's much more nuanced than that. It's much more real than that. And that's the kind of stuff that you just don't have time to do in a movie. When people want firmer answers, even if those firm answers are a question that you're leaving for whatever the next episode of that franchise film is.
Totally. I wouldn't have hated like a 10-minute King Shark dialogue sequence though. I would have been okay with that. You're right in that you do have to know it's like the difference between a play and a movie. Who's pitching to the back of the crowd and how subtle can you be? And I think what makes the show work is it doesn't feel like there's any change. It just feels like this is that story, as opposed to I'm in a different medium, I'm in a different format, and that's kind of the secret sauce, is that it doesn't feel less fun. It doesn't feel like a compromise. It doesn't feel like it's trying to be artier. It just feels like, well, this is how I would spend about 6 hours with this guy. I get him, and I like him, and I don't like him, and I know he means well in his own really bad way, and he does.
And you see in the show, like, he's an asshole in Suicide Squad. But at the very beginning of the first episode of Peacemaker, we find out a couple things about the guy that I think give us some compassion for him. Number one, his dad is 20 times as bad as he is. Like, wherever he's coming from, he's grown. He's better than what came before him. That's number one. And number two, he's got an eagle he treats like his baby. And that sort of sweetness in him is something we never see in the Suicide Squad. So I think that, we have a couple of things that we realize this guy has a little more to him than what we saw in the movie.
Yeah, it's such a natural evolution. Even I was thinking about just the line, like, who knows why madmen do what they do? Like, it's such a funny, not throwaway line, but it's just meant to be a fun line and play really well in the trailer and work in the movie. But when you start to watch the show, you go, well, no, he would also think that, because he would be sort of puzzled and frustrated. And it would be, I don't know why, and I wish they did, but I don't, so I kill them. That's just how I understand.
Yeah, I mean, he's a complicated guy, and I think he's done a lot of shitty stuff. But he, at his core, I think he's able to change, and that's what separates him from his father and some of the other characters.
Yeah, and that's what makes him interesting. Is we so often see people who don't, get the point, but then aren't open to getting the point. Like, he doesn't get the point, but he's open to learning, and that's part of the fun. We see every day on Twitter, whatever innocuous thing someone says, there's an immediate reaction, but you didn't mean this. I mean, you may have experienced that quite recently.
I did.
I know. Yeah. I saw this wonderful, beautiful post while I'm in the middle of being depressed about something, going, what a great sentiment, followed by people being like, you monster. Like,
I'm baffled sometimes with people on Twitter. Like, I don't get the lack of checking oneself a little bit. That's kind of what we've lost with the anonymity of social networking, is people being able to, say, hey, wait a second, I read this thing and I'm having an angry reaction to it. Maybe I can hold back for a second and question what that person's intent was in the tweet I'm reacting to. But really, a lot of what Twitter has become is this thing where people go into it with that, that anger, which is a frustration that I understand of so many people who have an anger in today's society. And then they want to lash out, and that lashing out gives them some semblance of power where they don't feel any,
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have a creative outlet that not everyone does. So, we should all be so lucky to be like, well, I got some things I want to say. Who's got $100 million? Because I got a couple of things I want to do. There's a special thing there that you can work it out and be like, I'm going to do my therapy, but it's going to involve John Cena and a CGI eagle. Like, there's a,
you're living in some idealistic place where my work is a form of therapy, as opposed to something that makes me need more therapy, which it actually does. So I do get to work out issues, but it's, it takes a lot out of me. And so, that's been something I've needed to learn to deal with over the years.
I think we all have. As we sort of wrap up, like, what does it feel like to then, once you've kind of like gotten it out of your system, to then come back and talk about it? Because I mean, the first time you wrote something for John to play as Peacemaker was how many years ago? And now it's coming back around to talk about, as opposed to you haven't seen it, but when you see it, you'll like it, and then we'll talk more. everyone knows what you did. Is it weird? Like, do you feel any more removed? Obviously, you made a movie in between, or is it just like I'm always thrilled to do this because how could I not want to talk about something that I enjoyed like this? Because I can
No, I think
understand
it
both
just
sides.
depends on the day. Like, today I'm excited. I haven't been doing a lot of interviews lately. I just got done shooting my movie. So, it makes it more fun to talk about this kind of stuff. Whereas when you're in the midst when I was in the midst of making a movie and then also having to go do 20 interviews a day,
Yeah.
like that can get, and you're just kind of saying the same thing, many times, that can get really difficult. But one thing I found is that like Peacemaker's still fresh. Like I wrote Peacemaker when lockdown started, like even after lockdown started, after a couple of months of lockdown. That's when I started writing Peacemaker. So it wasn't that long ago that I wrote the series. It got made immediately and then came out pretty quickly thereafter. And it was coming out, and that was a real amount of, I love the process of television, of putting something out that's a long form story, and you get to touch base with the audience every week as they, find out another piece of your story. It's an exciting thing. So it doesn't feel that distant to me. And not to mention the fact that I'm going to have to start writing Peacemaker season 2. And so that it's still very present. It's in my mind a lot, and conversations like this help me to work out, well, how I know where Peacemaker is going next. How do we get there exactly? What worked, what didn't, all those types of questions.
Oh yeah, you're not working out plot based on someone being like, what I really like, but I'm sure there's this little thing in the back of your mind. Okay, I keep hearing about these couple of things, and I'm not going to do the same thing, but I know what I was thinking when I got to that moment that got that reaction. So okay, now I have that in my head as I'm, crafting,
Although I think it can be a danger both ways. I mean, I think it can be a danger when you're copying yourself, which I've done.
Yeah.
And I think it can be a danger when you're working against what the expectations of something you're doing is, because both of those things are ways in which you're acting, you're letting the past dictate your future as opposed to letting your present dictate your future. And what I like to do is try to put myself in a state of nothingness as much as possible and just see what's there. And that, to me, is the freest place for creativity.
And I think as just to sort of end on, I think you're as good at that as anyone, because these giant projects are their IPs. There's, if anything, would feel like, okay, you have to color within the lines. It would be these projects, but they feel so unique and personal that if you are somehow coloring in the lines, it's with this giant vat of like acid as opposed to paint that you're just throwing at it and letting it be you. So whether it's I'm within the lines, but it's the way no one else would do it, or I'm taking it outside the lines, but it just seems like the way you want it, you're able to sort of walk between the worlds. I mean, quite literally in terms of the IP, but in terms of just making things that feel like the guy who made Slither and PG porn would make with a budget, as well as being these giant things that almost anyone can enjoy. And it's brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I just tell stories I like. I feel restricted. I don't feel restricted at all making movies, like the Suicide Squad or even Guardians. They're PG-13 films, but it depends on who you're speaking to. I'm speaking to families. I know that. So I'm not going to be saying the F word at every turn. But I'm always making the stories that I want to tell. I've never held back at all, no matter what the size of the movie. In fact, when I first came into Marvel, I think my first draft of Guardians, I did try to contain myself because I was afraid of getting too weird, and I was afraid of pushing people away because I'm odd.
Yeah.
And they were like, no, go full on, be yourself. And then a lot of the best moments of Guardians came out of that. And I think Peacemaker is simply the most me of anything I've ever done. Like there's nothing that has really allowed me to go and be as free as this television show has been, which is crazy because it's a big budget premiere TV show featuring characters from DC Comics.
Yeah.
But it is, I love it.
Yeah, and let me be the millionth person to say keep up the good work, because listen,
Thank you.
Whether it's Marvel saying, it's a sentient murderous raccoon, you can be a little weirder, or you're just making this character that so easily could be just despicable, someone you care about. It's amazing, and I can't wait to see what's next. And that just goes for anything you do, because you have such a unique voice, and you seem to be having so much fun, which is the other thing. You want people who do this job to like what they do, because listen, so many people have jobs they don't like. If they go and watch someone to enjoy, if they go to enjoy themselves and watch someone clearly not enjoying themselves, that's how could you not be pissed at them, you know?
Yeah. Well, there's no resentment in my work. I think that, and a lot of times, a lot of directors I know, they have a certain amount of resentment towards the stories that they're telling or who they're telling them for. And I don't have that. I feel, pure in what I'm doing. And I think that if there's anything that keeps me away from being too weird from, for bigger audiences, because emotionally, I really am open, and I believe, and I love my characters, and I'm very sincere in that, and the love that I have for my characters. And I hope that reads to an audience, and that I think is something that anybody can relate to. So it makes it very, it makes it easier for an audience member. Like, even when I was making Peacemaker, I'm like, yeah, this guy's crass. This guy, there's a lot of political stuff here. There's a lot of different elements, but I never want it to be a show that's holding people at bay. I never want it to be cool. It's not about ever being cool. It's always going to invite the audience in, as opposed to pushing them away. And that was sort of the thing that I talked about with the producers, all the actors from the beginning, in what the tone of the show was. And I found this sort of, what to me is really this fun middle ground of being edgy, but also very inviting at the same time.
Right. And the love that you share is reciprocated. And what else can we ask for? So I'm thrilled. I love it. I can't wait to see what's next. And this was delightful. Like I said, I've loved your stuff for a long time. So
thanks, man.
Whether it's my pleasure, whether it's even weirder than this or a little more towards the middle, there's no one doing what you're doing. So please do keep it up.
I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, dude. Thanks.
Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.